So, to everybody that is joining us from wherever you are, thanks for taking some time to spend a little bit this afternoon with the PTP and Avant organization. So today, this is, I think, our sixth happy hour panel discussion that we have held in the last couple months. It's got a lot of great response, so really happy with that. Had some great dialogue around cloud and cloud migration and cost optimization, remote support, migrations, et cetera. So it's been a really good time. Feel like you're all in for a treat this afternoon for some healthy discussion around what we're seeing around the next generation network and access technology, specifically with SD-WAN, and really trying to kind of weed through all the marketing stuff out there and figure out what really drives an impact. So it should be a good discussion. You know, before we kind of get into the meat of the discussion and meet our panelists, getting to wear the marketing hat at PTP, I get to give a little bit of shameless promotion for what we're trying to do in terms of just reaching out a bigger audience. So we do have a great page on our site under the resources, which is our webinar archive. All the conversations that I just mentioned previously are posted up under that webinar archive. So you got a free few minutes and you want to pop on and see what some experts have to say, like I said, around cloud security and migration, things like that. There's some great discussions there. Also love for you to follow us under LinkedIn. It's a channel for us that has a lot of action, a lot of activity, a lot of volume in terms of what we're doing, what we're saying, and things that are going on with us. Our blog post gets updated. Our blog gets updated with posts probably every 2 to 3 weeks. Again, some of it is, you know, business oriented, some of it's market oriented, and some of it's technical by, you know, our CCIE level and high level AWS architect engineers. So some great content out there. And then for those of you that are customers of PTP, obviously, you know, as an organic growth type company, the best way for us to grow is through referrals. So you think there's some other organizations that would benefit from the value that PTP provides, certainly reach out and we'd love to talk to them. So we got, like I said, we got a great group with us today, so really looking forward to the discussion. My name is Gary Durheim. I'm actually based in Dallas, responsible for the managed services organization at PTP and marketing. We call this a happy hour panel discussion because it's just that. It's 4 o'clock East Coast time, and the idea is we're just going to have a beer and have or whatever people want to drink and have some conversation around some technology. So part of what we do is introduce what we're having. What I'm having is called a half-life. This is kind of science interest. This is from the Manhattan Project Brewery in Dallas, Texas, and again, everything that they have is related to nuclear science. So this is the half-life IPA, hazy IPA. So nice summer, smooth, big taste, but finishes crisp kind of beer. So so that's me. And now let's go ahead and introduce each of our panelists. We'll start with you, Mike.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining. Mike McElhenney, one of the partners at PTP. Today, at this happy hour, I am drinking something close to our company's heart, Cloud Candy. Cloud Candy is brewed by a Waltham, Massachusetts-based brewer known as Mighty Squirrel. This beer is a super hazy, juicy New England IPA. You pour it in the glass and it looks like guava juice, I think. I don't even know what guava juice looks like, but I like saying it. And, you know, we found this beer maybe, I don't know, 7 months ago, and I like to call it our mascot beer. So that's what I'm having, and I love it.
Awesome. Thanks. John?
Yeah, I'm John Hudson with PTP, been here for about 3 years, and I am primarily in sales based in Kansas City, so I'm on the west coast of Pinnacle, and today I am having a Boulevard single wide IPA. And this kind of earthy tones, pretty strong IPA taste, bitter on the back of the tongue. And Boulevard is a Kansas City brewing company. So it was started here, owned by a German firm now, but I like most of their beers.
Good. Way to keep it real. Left up, Nico.
Hey everyone, Nico O'Hara at Avant. So I'm on the pre-sales engineering side, been in the role just under 7 years, and I'm drinking some good old coffee to get me through the next couple hours. So I have no interesting story to tell here.
Any particular type of coffee that you like to drink, or just straight up generic?
This is Moose Munch because my dog's name is Moose and someone got it for me, and it is milk chocolate caramel, and I'm drinking it black, and it's actually pretty good.
There you go. Awesome. Well, appreciate you guys joining us. So one of the things we'd like to do just to kind of set up the conversation before we get going is just frame things up from a market perspective. And obviously we don't want to do a bunch of slideware. We want this to be a conversation, but you know, so data's saying, obviously, we're seeing the shift in technology. It's like if you kind of go back to, you know, we've got the T1 world, we got the frame relay world, we started to move into MPLS. Now, really heavy shift in significant growth for that SD WAN space. So, you know, the big numbers obviously well outpacing normal growth from the IT market over the next 5 years on a compound annual growth rate. So those are pretty impressive numbers. What I thought on this kind of next piece of data that was interesting is it really kind of represents that there is not extreme dominance in the players, and that there's a significant amount of diversity out there, a lot of technologies and a lot of vendors fighting for market share, and a lot of organizations having a fairly small amount of that. So that really leads into me to the discussion that we're going to have today, and that's trying to really declutter that whole paradigm and try to make sense of it. And so really happy to have the guys on the panel today to have that discussion with you. So let's jump in, and I think that this is a great question. Mike, I'll start with you, but I think we can just kind of bounce it around everybody. So maybe just talk a little bit about, you know, your experience with WAN and, you know, a story of kind of how things are different today versus when you started, whenever that was. Obviously, there's a couple of us that have a little bit more maturity than others on the call.
Sure, I'll go first. Yeah, so it's funny, I wasn't sure you were going to throw any slides up, Gary, so I did a little research, and I actually went to IDC, and IDC's number was 30% CAGR between now and 2023 in SD-WAN. And that number, just to be clear, because I looked at Gartner as well, that just represents the hardware software solutions that we're talking about today. There's many parts of the puzzle that make up SD-WAN. The brains of it is the hardware and the software, and that's where there's going to be significant growth, right? I think IDC said that about $1.8 billion of product shipped in 2019, and they expect 5.3 billion to ship in 2023. That's 300% growth, or like you said, that 29% CAGR. It's really kind of cool to think about and to be a part of. If you're, you know, a customer, if you're a partner that helps customers with decisions, it's really a cool time to be in it, in this market of connectivity. And, you know, to be honest with you, it's always been pretty cool to be in the connectivity world. I started in 1996. That's when I sold my first internet connection. I was working for a small regional ISP called Ultranet Communications, which was part of RCN. They actually changed the name about a year after that. And the reason I got into it is because it was so cool. It was expensive. I knew the internet was something that was coming on, because when I was in college, they kept saying, you know, we're putting the internet in that lab and in this lab, and it's going to be great, you know. So I wanted to get into sales, and that was what I chose. And from 96 straight through today, you know, there's nothing but change happening. You know, it seems like it's quarterly or every half year something changes. And guess what? The price points are the most dramatically changing area, right? Because you mentioned T1. A T1 is 1.544 megabits per second, right? Back in the day, I could sell a T1, a dedicated T1 to a customer for $4,500 a month for 1.544 megabits per second. That's $1,295, per megabyte, right? Today you can get 200 megabits. Sorry, you got to be very clear on that. Megabits per second for under $500 a month. So, it's 130 times less expensive to get a connection to the internet today than it was 24 years ago. So a lot has changed in SD-WAN. Today is making another big impact on what customers have to pay for really, really good connectivity. So I'm excited. Like I said, 24 years of selling it. Always trying to help customers get data from point A to point B. And that's what it's all about for us. And we hope we can leave some good thoughts in your head about what SD-WAN means. So I'll pass it to, I guess, John.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, that's amazing, that type of just growth that we've seen over the years, and the reduction in cost. And there's other things that are also affecting people moving towards software defined, and that's where the applications reside. When I got started, I guess it was 1998, and I also working for, at that time, a value-added reseller in the WAN space. A T1 to the internet from AT&T was $1,875. So the price had dropped a little bit in '99 from where you were, but my journey really started with frame relay. Talk about data from point A to B, and back then we had to have a real detailed understanding of the applications because of the bandwidth. Bandwidth was very costly. And you may remember a term called CIR, or committed information rate. Yep. Well, that was kind of like the SLA from the carrier saying, you won't go below this. And so you really had to have a strong, deep understanding of where those applications were, what the latency levels are, and what the bandwidth needs are going to be. And then next, of course, MPLS came about, and that ushered in a fully meshed architecture that enabled voice and video communications, and you could steer applications and give priority, and many organizations still use MPLS, and it's still valid today for some applications. But even with MPLS, the applications are mostly confined to the corporate data center. And then, so as applications have become more decentralized and moved to cloud SaaS like Salesforce.com and Box and O365 and on and on and on, including AWS and those resources could be anywhere across the globe. So having that closed network really just doesn't work anymore. And so, I mean, I really see it like self-driving cars are on the horizon, but right now there's self-driving networks, and that's really what software defined is about, and being able to steer those applications and those users where you want them to go. Nico, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you. I think I can't echo your guys' experience, but I'll do the best with what I've got. So from my perspective,
you don't have any punch card stories, Nico?
No, I don't. I'm actually a lot older than I look. No, I'm not. But from my perspective, when I was hired on at Avant about 7 years ago, it was mainly to cover cloud and confusing emerging technologies. So I have a lot of experience with like disaster recovery as a service and desktop as a service and things like that. I almost never touched any sort of connectivity opportunities because our base of sellers all knew that pretty well. It was very transactional. It was, I need a circuit here for this speed, and our pricing team would quote it. Even if it was MPLS, there wasn't a whole lot of complexity to it. But since then, I've been more and more involved in these types of opportunities because there is so much more there now. SD-WAN is emerging. It's really, just lighting up, and everyone wants to know about it. Customers are interested in it, but they don't necessarily fully understand it. So in sort of the blink of an eye, SD-WAN has kind of emerged as another one of those technologies that everyone needs to get their hands on, but there's not a whole lot of education out there. So that's been a big part of my role, and that's kind of why I'm here today.
Awesome. Yeah, John, I thought that, at least from my perspective, for somebody that's non-technical, that the explanation around obviously the shift in applications from the data center to the cloud and kind of the need for a more dynamic network, that certainly made a lot of sense. So, maybe looking back on, the collective experience for the group, try to talk about, we kind of frame up at the same time, SD-WAN based on people's definitions is either, it's kind of like a set of products from some vendor and it's a service from carrier type organization. So kind of what it is, or some of the different flavors, and then, maybe a positive impact that it made from a customer, kind of like a case study to help illustrate for the attendees really what that shift kind of enabled that end customer to do.
Sure. I mean, I'll go first. So, when I think about it, they're probably, when you think about sales that have made the most impact on a business, for me, I've sold a lot of virtualization. VMware back in the mid 2000s was huge, and putting people into that type of solution where they could virtualize and put many different applications on a single physical server and leverage backend storage. That was a huge benefit to the business. But even more so, selling SD-WAN in the last 5-6 years has really helped customers that I've worked with. I'll give an example, right? A company that has 280 locations. They're a business services organization. They offer services to thousands of Fortune, 5,000 companies, and they really were struggling to continue to pay for high-end MPLS connections as the primary circuits in their locations, right? 280 locations, each of which had a 10 megabit connection, MPLS connection, right? And they had a primary connection, and they realized that the ability to communicate, and have access to their applications was so important that they paid for a secondary MPLS network as well. So you had two side-by-side MPLS networks. One was on, one was just sitting there waiting to be used. The monthly recurring cost for that infrastructure, for that network, was over $650,000 a month just to pay for connectivity. Well, 6 or 7 years ago when SD-WAN started to come out and be popularized, these guys were all about it. They jumped on it. They purchased the hardware and software. They deployed it across the environment, and they were able to take that MPLS network, the secondary network, out and put in a DIA, dedicated internet access connection in each location. And they put a 10 meg DIA in the mix, and they took their $650,000, excuse me, down to about $400,000 a month, and they loved it, right? There was an ROI, and they had an active environment where you had your primary and your secondary, and the intelligence was there to route traffic based on path performance, which is huge in SD-WAN. And, to be honest with you, for me, that CIO was forever grateful, right? Cutting away almost $3 million of spend, OpEx spend a year, was fantastic. And giving the guy and the team the peace of mind to say, I don't have to worry about whether a failover is going to happen. It's automatic, right? So for me, that's like the very true quintessential story around SD-WAN is you take out that expensive backup network, you put it into the game, you save a ton of money, and you have smiling CFOs, CIOs, CEOs. So that's, I think, one story that's good.
Any reliability or obviously you're getting costs back. Any issues, people giving up anything from a reliability or performance perspective, or are they getting the same performance at lower cost?
So the thing that you're giving up, right, is the largest carriers in the world, right? The AT&Ts, the Verizons, the CenturyLinks. Those players have an SLA on their MPLS networks that are rock solid, right? many CIOs and directors and VP level folks manage their business based on those SLAs and the uptime of applications. So there's risk, right? Because you're taking SLAs and you're basically saying, you know what, I'm going from 99.99 on their network once it leaves the building and goes out there, and I'm taking it down to maybe 99.7. But what you're doing in this in an SD-WAN scenario is you're taking two 99.7s, blending them together, and really probably getting more than the 4 nines that the original SLA gets you. So, so for you to say or ask, is there, any downside? The downside is you can't point to a piece of paper and say, I had an SLA, I bought this because of this. And, if you're experienced with SD-WAN solutions and you've built it, takes a little time to realize that you're getting, just as good a situation with the SD-WAN solution. I would say that would be one downside. John, what would you think is a downside?
I mean, you nailed it on the downside. I mean, that to me, that's the only downside. And and if you're a bank and you're really concerned about security, MPLS might be a good one. For example, I have a customer that is a bank processor. And so their customers are other banks, and it's just ones and zeros. And there's no internet traffic. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yep, I saw the spinning wheel there. No internet traffic or anything like that. And so MPLS serves their purpose quite well. They don't have to, there's no any-to-any connectivity going on in that network. But yeah, I totally agree. And I have a pretty good example too, another case scenario that I came across, and it's an oil and gas company in Houston, and they were being spun off, divested from a larger organization. And part of that project was, it's kind of like fueling an F-22 jet in mid-flight. You still have to keep the operations of the company going, and at the same time, replace the network, replace the software, and all of those operations. So what we were able to do was to bring in inexpensive, dedicated bandwidth. It wasn't cable or anything like that, but it was a dedicated internet bandwidth, and put that up against the MPLS bandwidth and make that transition from one company to the other, and then shut off the MPLS network. And today it's just worked out great. And with software-defined WAN, you can add all kinds of different bandwidth types to it, from satellite to 3G, 4G backup to, here pretty soon, once we have an all-you-can-eat cellular package in 5G, it's not going to be a backup anymore. It's going to be a redundant primary connection with something else. So I just see so much flexibility with software-defined WAN, and also you're not locked into a carrier either. You get to choose, and based upon that.
Wouldn't you guys agree that, John, you mentioned how important it was to understand your application stack and understand which application needed or how much bandwidth each application needed to perform optimally? Back in the day, it was very important because you knew that every megabit per second that you added was going to add hundreds and hundreds of dollars of cost per month. So rigid guidelines and IT managers and network folks would be very focused on making sure that QoS was built a specific way because certain apps had to perform the way they did and they had limited bandwidth. Nowadays, with SD-WAN, you're opening up this super wide pipe. And I feel like some of those concerns of bandwidth restraints have gone away because the cost of bandwidth, like we talked about at the very beginning, is just plummeted. Would you guys agree with that? I mean, have you seen that, Nico?
Yeah, I think going back to the earlier point you made about, the potential downsides with SD-WAN or the risks, right? Another one that I've run into is as we open it up and we say, all right, we're going to maybe move away from one MPLS carrier to now just sourcing the best of breed, whatever's available in a given area, right? I might have 2 different carriers for one site times, 50 sites, and maybe there's 20, 30 carriers in there. And there's one that we worked with last year that's a large sandwich chain, and they've got several hundred locations, primarily in the US. And what they were doing, they were moving away from MPLS. Due to price and limited bandwidth, they wanted to enable more and more digital services in their stores, have more of an experience for guests, tablets and things like that, to ring up sales. And then also at the same time, they're moving to cloud voice with RingCentral actually. So the combination of those things meant that their legacy network, transporting them back to the data center, just wasn't effective, and it was just not cost effective either. And so what they ended up doing with us is basically adding, broadband as a primary at a lot of the sites, DIA at the larger sites, and then those sites would have 3 links: DIA, broadband, LTE. The rest had broadband and LTE, which was primarily passive because, again, you mentioned, John, those usage costs. But by putting in SD-WAN, they actually went with an aggregator. In this case, it was Mettel, because they didn't want to also own, all right, SD-WAN is going to give me the freedom to go out and have any carrier in any location, but I don't then want to be responsible for managing these 30 different carriers. So in that case, it was a combination of sort of the right technical fit and the right fit for the business, and combining those into the SD-WAN solution basically from Mettel, along with their circuit aggregation.
And that's one bill and then one number to call with any problem at any store. You don't have to worry about knowing the contract numbers at all the stores. A lot of time savings and ease of management, right?
Yep, 100%. Monitored 24/7. A lot of times Mettel's catching the issue before they ever do.
Nice. That's a cool case study. Sure.
Yeah, so I'm hearing, obviously from a more the layman's perspective, that there's, the upside on flexibility and cost is huge. The downside is very low and manageable. So, I kind of want to maybe flip the conversation just a little bit. And Nico, for you, obviously the organization you work with, we're partners of you. You've got the opportunity to work with a lot of organizations and obviously represent a number of different technologies and solutions. And so I think the big question now, having set up, at a high level, the technology and the value of the technology, is with so many different vendors, with so many different solutions, what are the things that you're doing to kind of help map a customer need into a specific solution to try to deliver them the best value and performance for the dollars?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and there's so much confusion in the marketplace. If you look at the most recent Magic Quadrant from Gartner, there's, I think, 25 different options in the Magic Quadrant. That's just overwhelming to customers. When they go out there, they're going to have conversations with, all right, well, let me talk to the leaders. I guess I'll talk to a couple of these ones. Okay, we use technology from, Riverbed. I'll talk to them as well. Sooner or later, they're talking to 8 different providers who are all selling them the dream of saying, hey, our SD-WAN is going to enable cloud. It's going to do this. It's going to do that. You can replace a private network. And really, no one's kind of getting into the actual details of what makes these things different. So that's one of the values that we try to provide and advise customers and potential clients on, look, we've got to look at this kind of from 2 angles. We try to sort it into sort of the technical aspect of it, and we're looking at, maybe the security functionality that's built into the solution, and how does that compare with what you have today? Are there any integrations that we could leverage or native security built in? And then also, how it handles different applications. This certain SD-WAN solutions might handle on-prem applications or voice applications or cloud applications differently, just the way they're architected. And then, so that's, one component of it, right, is that technical piece. How much bandwidth can the solution handle? How much throughput? How many circuits? Then on the flip side of that, we also have kind of that business conversation around, what support does the vendor have internationally, multi-language? Can they deliver in multiple countries that you're looking for? Or is it more regional? Do you need help actually implementing this solution? Do you need help managing it? Who manages your network today? And how familiar are you with emerging technologies that you might want to take this on yourself or not? And then the same thing, with that previous example I mentioned, as we move into a bunch of different potential carriers and multiple circuits per site, is that something you're also going to take on internally versus maybe the 1 or 2 carriers that you have today? So we kind of approach it from those 2 different angles and have sort of the business conversation, what we're trying to achieve and what you can do internally, and then the technical piece of, what are actually the requirements of the solution that you need. And by doing those sort of in tandem, we then try to arrive at the right service providers, leveraging the right technologies that are, a good fit for that client.
Nico, I was just wondering in all the clients you've talked with, what is the most common concern that they have for software-defined WANs?
Oh, that's a good one. I think the biggest concern is to what Mike was saying earlier is, look, I'm losing SLAs. How is this going to perform if I move? Can I really put my entire WAN on the internet, which is not only, not guaranteed performance, but also not guaranteed security, right? Now it's public. I don't have the safety of a private network anymore. So a lot of times the biggest concern is just the internet. How will it perform and how secure is it? So a lot of times then we have to talk to them about, well, look, the benefits of obviously merging multiple circuits together. We're going to get the best performing one at any given point in time. And from a security perspective, hey, every SD-WAN solution is going to have some kind of firewalling built in, right? We're going to encrypt from end to end with, AES 256 or 128-bit encryption. No one is getting in to see your data. And in some cases, it may be even more secure because you may not have been encrypting it before. And oh, by the way, if what SD-WAN delivers isn't enough, then we're going to look at, adding a third-party firewall or a cloud solution to that. So I think those are generally the concerns that we run into, but for the most part, except for like the kind of very extreme cases, you can usually kind of, explain it and back that down.
Yep.
That makes sense.
I think that customers need to understand what the goal is for the business, right? We talk to IT folks, the networking folks, right? They're typically being told like, hey, this is what we'd like to be able to do. Connectivity and carrier services is one of the top, always in the Fortune 500 company, one of the top 5 business expenses over the course of a year. If you can go to a CFO, if a CIO can go to a CFO and say, we have a solution that will keep our applications running with more reliability, they'll perform better. And by the way, we'll save 30% on our yearly spend. Usually it's a no-brainer, right? We at PTP like to start the conversation and say, hey, you want to consider a new architecture for your WAN? Let's do it as simply as possible. Let's eliminate complexity and overcome or talk about some of your concerns, the ones you were just mentioning, Nico, and we'll address each one of them one by one and hopefully land on a solution that's going to do, what I just said, improve your application performance, improve your reliability, and drop your costs tremendously. And that's a win for every customer, in my mind. And I think that's what is going to drive that growth that we were talking about at the very beginning.
So how much work needs to be done kind of on the front end evaluating? So you've obviously got business needs, you've got some general business direction. How much do we need to know about, applications and application performance and data flows and things like that to really drive them to the best solution? And that's probably to anybody that wants to field it. I know that kind of came out of left field, but.
Yeah, I mean, I'll take a stab.
Yeah.
I'll take a stab at it and definitely chime in. But, when you kind of have that initial conversation, you could really take it one of, 15 different ways, right? There's a lot of SD-WAN solutions out there, and a lot of them are doing similar things. But it's really when you get into those second, third, and fourth conversations and you start uncovering the things that are really critical to a given business that you start to, at least in my experience, identify, hey, these solutions might be a little bit better because Azure is a really critical component of this particular environment, or we're moving to a hosted voice solution, and that's maybe only going to work really well with certain SD-WAN solutions. Or, hey, these are a couple really, regional locations in Pennsylvania versus, these are 30 locations spread across three continents. So sometimes in that first conversation, you might have a pretty good idea, all right, these are kind of the top 3 or 4 I want to go to, and others it doesn't come out until maybe that third conversation where you're really getting into the weeds with a network engineer or solutions architect. But I think you can get there. It doesn't need to take 10 conversations, right? But there's certainly a little bit of nuance, and every customer is a little bit different. But Mike, go ahead. I was interrupting you.
Yeah, no, you weren't. I was going to say similar stuff, but for those on the call that are, responsible for making a decision on your wide area network, my suggestion is figure out what your applications require, right? Don't think you can just go into an SD-WAN conversation and allow a guy like me to say, yeah, I know exactly what you need. You need to put a broadband connection, at 150 meg up and 50 down, or maybe it's the other way around, 150 down, 50 up, and an LTE, 4G in place, and that'll do the job. That's enough bandwidth. We'll test it out, right? We've done that before, and we learn from that. Because if you go in and you put a solution in, and the person that was the technical recommender at the business didn't know that a certain application was sensitive to certain types of bandwidth, it could be a disaster, right? So my comment is, if you're a buyer, make sure you understand the applications that you have in place that are critical to the business. That once you share that with us, our engineering team and Avant team, we'll craft the right solution for you. A lot of times, and I don't want to predict the percentage of how many times this works out, but a lot of times just throwing bandwidth at it is a solution, right? If you have a 10 meg DIA at 50 locations and you're VPNing, and you have a failover that's manual to a broadband connection, right? We can put a solution in place, increase your bandwidth by 15x, right? And that'll handle every application you have without a problem. That's a lot of times. It's not every time, but it's a lot of times. So it's really a collaborative effort between, companies like Avant and PTP and your carrier to understand your applications first, and then scope the solution accordingly. Don't take that as, oh man, sometimes if I do that, I'm never going to land on an SD-WAN solution. No, you will, and it will save you money, and it will improve your performance and reliability, and most likely improve your security. So
awesome. So that's a great segue, because I was thinking about security a little bit, and John, I know we've had some conversations, and clearly everybody knows over the last 2-3 months the radical shift in home office workers and changes to VPNs, and so I think from a security perspective, back to SD-WAN. So somebody's in that situation. How does SD-WAN handle remote VPNs? And, is that something that people, organizations can feel comfortable with as they move forward, considering, more of a remote workforce?
Right. So yeah, going down the security rabbit hole, we can get really, really deep quickly, but most SD-WAN solutions are using IPsec encryption with PKI certificates for validation on either end, right? So simply put, they're just creating a VPN between the locations to lock down the traffic. And that really only addresses the transport. It's not addressing malware, viruses, and other dangerous payloads that could be there from the internet, especially if you're doing split tunneling. You have a private network, and then you're tunneling out to the internet at every site. So there's some considerations that come into play with the design. And the vendors address this in various different ways. Many of the carrier solutions that use, and Nico, you can chime in here too, that use VeloCloud or Versa, they provide a cloud-based firewall known as a secure internet gateway, so everyone is going out one gateway. Some of the other solutions like Meraki, they're including firewalling and malware detection, intrusion prevention, content filters, and such. And these can be delivered on the box, or they're delivered mostly in a hybrid solution. So like in the case of Meraki, you have cloud controls and you have access to threat data. So as many of you know, malware can propagate the globe in a matter of minutes, and having access to, say, Cisco Talos, for example, to have the most current threat intelligence is key to success there. But Yeah, the security conversation is an interesting one because if a company has a certain security footprint today and it's centralized, and then we move that to a decentralized security, is that something that fits the goals of the organization, or can we through PKI certificates allow for another solution to be used, an intrusion prevention system that perhaps is at a headquarters location. So it can, the security discussion can get pretty deep, and that's about as deep as I can go.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I think it does, to John's point, come down to kind of what are we doing today? Where do we need to go? And, what level of security are we comfortable with as an organization? Or do we require, maybe due to, compliance and regulatory standards? But I've seen really, there's so many combinations that it'd be hard to even list them all. There's the VeloClouds where they've got just a very basic firewall built in, and maybe you're partnering with, some kind of hosted firewall like a Zscaler, or you're centralizing with a Palo Alto in the data center. Or you're doing something like Versa, where similar to Meraki, they've got next-gen firewall functionality built in. You have all your anti-malware, your IPS, and your IDS at the edge, and that does enable, very secure, decentralized model. And then in some cases, you're maybe pairing the SD WAN solution with a firewall at the branch. That tends to be the most expensive solution. But it's certainly not one, outside of the realm of possibility. So it just comes down to the requirements and what's going to, make the most sense for the organization.
Yeah, I would say that, security is super important to an organization. You have to take it into consideration when rolling out or considering an SD-WAN opportunity for your organization. But at the end of the day, you can keep what you have, your posture the way it is today, and integrate it with whatever SD-WAN solution you roll out. It's not, I don't think it's, you got to bring them together every time and make them work together exactly in a synchronous way. You just have to make sure that you're taking it all into account and building appropriately. Here's the thing: if you're moving to an SD-WAN solution and you don't have some of those table stakes security products in place for your posture, you can add them into your environment at a very, very low cost. With Meraki, John mentioned it, you get a lot in a Meraki MX if you buy the security license, the advanced license, that you would have to pay a lot of money for if you went in a different direction. So that's, we're obviously a Cisco partner, and we believe heavily in their security, their go-to-market in security. So if you're talking to a customer, if anybody on the call is a customer that is sort of scratching their head about it, how they're going to secure their environments better, Meraki and Viptela with Cisco routers, ISR routers, they have pretty much all the bells and whistles you could want from a perimeter security standpoint.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's an important thing to note is, and I'm going to frame it up the way I'm thinking about it, and you guys can let me know if this is kind of on target, but if you're an organization that needs something, more comprehensive as a service, for example, maybe you don't have all those, remote firewalls and things of that nature, and you're looking for more of a quote unquote platform as a service, maybe those carrier-based systems or something like that is more up your alley, but you're an organization that kind of has your security architecture built out. You got kind of a platform or standardization for intrusion prevention or firewalling. You've got your two-factor authentication, et cetera, but you just want to extend that across your environment using SD-WAN. You can essentially take your architecture and just find a solution to kind of match that. So really part of what we're talking about is the ability to secure it is there. It's matching the customer, their needs to what they need. Platform. Yeah.
That's why there's so many different products. You mentioned that there's probably, Nico said 25 players on the Gartner Magic Quadrant. It's because all of them, some do all do some. And at the end of the day, it's all about matching what the customer needs with the technologies that are available.
So we're, obviously we work heavily with organizations that are either migrating to the cloud or have migrated to the cloud. So are there, Nico, maybe for you, or are there, for our cloud-focused customers, are there a particular set of SD-WAN solutions that kind of are more applicable to organizations like that, or I mean, can we pare down the number of vendors for them, or is it still kind of the full spectrum? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. It's a conversation that we have a lot because really any SD-WAN solution on the face of it, if you're migrating over from a legacy network, like John was alluding to, right, we've got a hub and spoke back to our data center, and that's where all the internet egress takes place. Any SD-WAN solution that enables you to leverage internet and do local breakout is going to give you better performance. If I'm getting to Office 365 and I'm on the East Coast and I need to backhaul to my data center on the West Coast, then get out to the Microsoft data center, which was also on the East Coast, that just doesn't make any sense, right? But if I'm using SD-WAN, I can egress locally and go directly to the applications that I need. I'm automatically going to get better performance. So just by enabling internet, that's something that SD-WAN is going to help you with cloud applications. But then as you get sort of further into that conversation, then you want to understand, what are all these cloud applications and how critical are they to the business? If it is O365, it's email, and it's file sharing, maybe it's not the worst thing in the world if, a session drops, right? But if it is, we're moving voice or video to the cloud, then you want to look at solutions that are also going to be able to protect those cloud applications in some way. And SD-WAN, typically, a lot of that protection like packet duplication and path selection and things like that happen between SD-WAN devices, between device A and device B. So there's different solutions out there where maybe you're leveraging a gateway, or maybe you're hosting an appliance in AWS or Azure, or maybe you're leveraging sort of a POP-based solution with a multi-tenanted SD-WAN appliance somewhere up in the cloud. But there's different ways of addressing those cloud applications, and that's just something you need to be conscious of, because if you're moving from a data center and you had SD-WAN appliances from your site to the data center, and you make a phone call and the link drops, your phone call is still up and running, right? But as soon as you move that PBX up into the cloud and you don't have an SD-WAN appliance sitting in, Ring Central's data center, when that link drops, your phone call drops too. So those are things that you need to account for in the design. And certain SD-WAN solutions, because maybe they have a gateway or they have a cloud appliance, you can get around that. But not everyone just out of the box. They're all going to kind of tell you, yeah, we're great for cloud applications, but you really want to understand what great means.
Yeah, exactly. My thought is to, or any of the cloud players, particularly those as the two dominant players, my thought is you need to build a very strong connection to those data centers, right? AWS has a product called Direct Connect. Azure has a product called Express Route. There's multiple ways to get to those ports, right? Because that's all they are, is ports into those clouds. You want to build the most cost-effective, reliable, bandwidth-intensive port that you can if you're committed to building and putting mission-critical applications in those clouds. PTP together can build out really strong connectivity with partners like Megaport, partners like Comcast, Light Tower, which is now Crown Castle. There's so many cool ways to build out, Gary, a connection into the cloud that's different than all the connections maybe for remote office that, yeah, they need to get to cloud apps, but it's more important for them to have the solid, phone connectivity, because they're say a real estate agent banging away on a cloud phone system. There's just a lot of ways to skin the cat, but if you're committed to the cloud, you need to build a certain way, and we know how to do it. So
you bring up a great point there too, Mike, just to briefly add on to that. But when we talk about cost and cost savings, when you're doing a lot of AWS or Azure traffic, you could be facing a ton of cost from that egress. Every time you're exiting a public cloud, the data is going to cost you pennies, but per gigabyte, really. So when you do leverage those private connections, the direct connect or express route, you can save substantially on that while you're getting better performance. So it's certainly something that you want to take into account in any sort of cloud-heavy design.
And you can integrate that right into your SD-WAN.
So I want to go kind of shift to, kind of experience and lesson learned. So, part of what we try to do as consultants is help our customers avoid those landmines as they're making a migration in any technology. So, we talked about, security aspects and the changes in the market and the players and some of the analysis that we need to do. Wondering if you guys have any examples of, maybe customers that made that move to SD-WAN but didn't get the value out of it that they were expecting, and maybe why that was, whatever the reason, and maybe we can help our, attendees at least be aware of those things and avoid that if they're in the process of making the move. Any ideas?
I haven't had too many failures on that, but probably one of the biggest things is when a company decides to go at it alone and order Comcast here, Time Warner there, or whatever, and they're trying to manage multiple different carriers. I mean, that is a daunting task for any organization. And so trying to go at it alone, contact us. There are aggregators out there that we can work with, and we can help you aggregate all of that into one. So it can become a much larger project. It's not like MPLS where you call 3 carriers that come and give you free quotes and you say, here. There's a lot more detail work to it.
Yeah, I would say too that going into it, a customer needs to know that there's multiple parts that make up the whole, right? You have to think about the circuits, the connectivity, because you're talking about multiple circuits at each location. And John was just talking about using an aggregator to help manage that and make sure you get that piece right. There's hardware and software, which is offered up by a different organization typically. Through the care. There's services to deploy the solution and get it in and running. And then there's also the managed services play to make sure that if there's problems along the way on day 2, you have someone to call that can fix it. So, or if there's billing issues or whatever the problems, there's so many problems in the carrier world, you need a good managed service player. So there's multiple parts to the whole equation, right, that you need to take into consideration. If you don't, the project can be a failure right at the very get-go. And then I'll add that there are customers that had, and I don't, like John said, most of them see an advantage, they get the benefit, but they might not get the full benefit. I mentioned that 280 site location, right? They still haven't moved off their primary MPLS because the CIO is too afraid to. I know that they could move to 50 meg DIA and cut that, $300,000 bill down to about 180, but there's still those old codgers that are in the corner office, and she just doesn't want to make the change because it's her reputation. So I think that if you can find a decision maker who's not afraid to take what she or he considers a risk, those are the ones that are going to see the full benefit of SD-WAN. The ones that are a little bit afraid, they're only going to they'll see a huge benefit, but it's not going to be the full benefit. And I'll stop talking now.
Yeah, I think just adding on to what you guys are saying, and you talked about, understanding the applications and the different components of the whole solution, right? You also, as a potential business looking at SD-WAN, you want to understand why you're doing what you're doing, right? Let's not do SD-WAN just because it's a buzzword and somebody said I have to move to it. So the ones that the couple that I've talked to where SD-WAN just wasn't the greatest fit, or maybe they didn't realize what they wanted to see out of it, to Mike's point, are just, the ones where we can't identify the right drivers, or we're just looking at it again because somebody told me to look at it. So as an example, this one that I was talking to a couple weeks ago, they've got 7 sites, they've got 1 gig circuits as all their primary connectivity, and then their backups are either they have a couple broadband circuits, but they're only 100 meg download maybe, and then the other sites have LTE. And so you don't really need active SD-WAN. We don't want to kill an ant with a sledgehammer here, because how likely is it that you're going to leverage that LTE path in an active scenario? So really what we need is just some kind of passive failover method to get us from link A to link B. So I don't want to come in and position, a Silver Peak or a VeloCloud or some kind of top of the line SD-WAN solution that's just not going to be the right fit. And it's going to be over-engineered, very expensive. And then down the line, they're going to say, what are we paying for this for? So it's also important to just kind of set those realistic expectations that if all you really want is an active passive, let's give you a solution that does that. Not just because, it enables the cloud and all these other things that maybe you don't need.
That nails it, right? Start with simplicity. Offer the best solution, the simplest solution that drives costs down, improves reliability, and improves performance, right? And that can be potentially a simple solution that isn't all the bells and whistles. It goes back to some want all want some. I think most want some. They don't all need it all. So.
Yeah. No, I typically follow that utilitarian approach, the greatest good for the greatest amount of people, right? You give the CFO the win, give the win to the IT team, but don't spend 10 years planning for it. There are things that you can do to act now, obviously, and go gain an advantage for business. Yeah. No question.
Businesses we work with have 1,500 applications. You don't have to make sure that every single one, you can't make their performance worse, but you don't have to improve everyone by 1,000% either, right? So anyway. For sure. Cool. For sure. So gentlemen, we're at the top of the hour. I think for me, the greatest part for me in getting to host these sessions is I learn something new, every week when we do them, and I certainly have today. So appreciate your experience and your expertise in this area. Any parting shots from any of you before we wrap this thing up today? Anything that I missed that we want to make sure we get out there?
I mean, I'll take a stab at it. Maybe the only thing I'll say is that, we didn't necessarily touch on all the different components of SD-WAN, but one is really just the simplicity of, taking all these disparate circuits and carriers and networks and applying one policy, right? I'm going to make the network so much simpler and it's still going to perform better. So I kind of, I don't want to super generalize it, but it's sort of, think of it as kind of the easy button for the network. Yep. And it really is, a pretty low barrier to entry.
Yep. I'll say this. I mentioned that article from May of 2017 in The Economist, where data is now the most valuable resource on the planet, right? Data just sits there on a disk without the right connectivity, and you guys on the call that are responsible building out the right connectivity for your organizations, you need to consider SD-WAN, and you need to kind of work with somebody who can help. And I think we can help. Awesome.
And I'll leave with these final words, and that is the self-driving network is already here. we can help you see that reality.
Yep. Sounds like a good bumper sticker. I feel it. Excellent. Well, for our attendees that join us, thank you for taking your time to spend an hour with us this afternoon. We very much appreciate it. For those that registered that weren't able to attend, we will post this recording on our website like we had the previous events, and we'll send links out to those as well as to the rest of the customer base so they've got an opportunity to see it. So great stuff. Appreciate you guys taking the time, appreciate our panelists, and hope you guys have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Gary.
See ya.
Thanks, guys.